Good afternoon, good evening, good morning for those of you who are watching from other locales. Welcome to this webinar on the evolution of device security brought to you by IET Media. So we've got a really interesting discussion today that will hopefully expand your mind about what goes on in devices that you use to consume video and audio. What I would just like to do then is just introduce what the IET is and what IET Media is all about and what this session is actually part of. So if you just give me a second. So as I said, we're here today to talk about the evolution of device security. I'm Ian Nock. I'm the vice chair of the IET Media Network, which is a volunteer group facing the media and media technology industry and television industries from within the Institution of Engineering Technology, which is a learned professional engineering institution that's been in existence for over 150 years at this point. So, as I said, we're here today to talk through the evolution of content security, device security. This is part of a presentation series that we've been running since January, which previous ones have been on the subjects of quantum secure cryptography, on C2PA, and on content security overall, and the approach to anti-piracy. And for this one, we've brought together two great speakers. One, Rodrigo Fernandes from Irdeto, and I'll let him introduce it more fully in a moment. And also we've got Tom Thomas, an independent consultant out there who has a great deal of experience working in the device security technology. And so we're going to have a real deep dive into where the state is as it is at the moment. So what I would like to do, without further ado, is to hand over to Rodrigo Fernandes, who can give himself a much better introduction and tell you a little bit more about his thoughts on device security and where it is today.
Thank you, Ian. Thank you for inviting me. So my name is Rodrigo Fernandes. I am the head of content security products at Irdeto. So I'm responsible for product lines like conditional access, cloud DRM, client DRM, both software and hardware implementations, and also for in manufacturing and online provisioning of security assets to CP devices like set-top boxes, routers, and so on. I'm based out of Amsterdam and been with Irdeto now for 12 years. So Ian, shall we jump into the video delivery evolution?
Yeah, absolutely. Please do.
All right. So look, in terms of video delivery, security for video delivery, and specific when we're talking about the distribution aspect of content, there's been a significant change over the last 20, 30 years. Traditionally, in the past, the primary means of content distribution was through consumers would watch the content through set-top boxes, and set-top boxes were managed devices sold or leased by typically the pay TV, and that the user would connect using a managed network, and that content would be distributed through IPTV or prior to that DTH or satellite, and typically that content would be protected with conditional access. So the entire ecosystem was very much a closed ecosystem. You had a managed box, a proprietary box with a proprietary CA running a proprietary firmware, and the content would be sent through a managed closed network. So the whole thing was kind of very simple ecosystem compared to what we have today. Throughout the years we have evolved, and streaming is the main or is the upcoming means of distributing content. There's still broadcasts, but we see these big, especially the big studios and now the big sports rights holders, to building services that are direct-to-consumer services, and the primary means of distribution is the internet. So streaming is streaming distribution, what's often referred to OTT, over-the-top distribution. It's a completely different animal, and for many reasons. That any user or users will use whatever device they prefer, mobile devices, browsers, smart TVs, set-top boxes, in-car video entertainment systems, projectors. So there's a whole ecosystem of devices out there, and it's very common for streaming platforms to support over 1,000 different device models. Then there is the distribution, the streaming format themselves. There's several streaming formats. The most common it's HLS and Dash. And then also on the protection system, typically each device will have their own preferred protection systems, which is, often refers to DRM, digital rights management. And they are they tend to be platform specific. For example, all the Apple devices have FairPlay, which is the Apple DRM. Google, Android, Chrome browsers have Whitevine. Google does license their technology to OEMs, to device manufacturers that can integrate it. And there's another third one, which is Microsoft Play Ready, which you'll typically find especially in set-top boxes, smart TVs, and obviously on Windows. So it's a completely different diverse ecosystem, much more open. PCs, Androids are very open ecosystems. So the piracy, the attack surface, it's much wider than what it used to be. And so there's a lot of diversity in this new world.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much for that. Should we move on to Tom now?
Thanks, Ian.
Okay, we're there. Yeah.
My name's Tom Thomas. I've worked in the semiconductor industry for a large part of my career, and particularly to do with set-top box and consumer device security since 1999. So I was there for the start of proper security on set-top box chips. Previously, delivery of keys over broadcast to bring the preserve of smart cards, and then there was a big drive through the sort of early noughties and beyond to increase the bar for security on consumer SoCs, really from nothing really to an extremely high level, as in line with the increased efforts of bad actors out there wishing to steal content. And in between two big semiconductor roles, I was 8 years at a company called Farncombe and then Cartesian, and I was a senior auditor in the security practice there, and involved in a lot of security work on behalf of major Hollywood content providers and security vendors, anyone who sold a security solution into the content and media space. Basically, we were one of a few companies around the world who had the in-house expertise to give an independent view on these things. So yeah, video is I'm protecting video. It's always been my first love, my number one. Yeah, and that's me.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So let me just stop sharing the screen now then, and let's go to an all-up view. If I can just make sure we can change that. Okay. Let me just confirm this. Oops. Always fun switching. Okay, do we have that as the gallery view now? That's what we have to ask ourselves. Okay, I hope that is actually, if someone can probably wave in chat, if you can actually see all three of us, that would be really cool. It's always a bit unsure at this end. Excellent, got that confirmation back. So thanks for that introduction. Obviously, there's a huge transformation being taking place in the video industry over the last 5 to 10 years of moving to internet delivery and very much consumer electronics perspective, as you've laid out a little bit there. So with that move to that consumer devices being used for consumption of video and things, and the move away from proprietary content protection solutions, backed largely by obscurity and particularly with respect to specific implementation variations, so that it made it very hard for pirates to actually identify how to get actually access to content off a device. And now moved across to using DRM implementation, which is largely drawn from 3 different large software vendors and hardware vendors in the frame of Microsoft, Apple, and Google with their Widevine solution. What are your thoughts? And this is to start with to Rodrigo. What are your thoughts about the diversity of those 3 solutions and the impact of their relative security and having so many eggs in so few baskets compared to maybe the older solutions we had?
I'm on mute. Sorry. So I think the main factors that play in the DRM ecosystem are well, one is the difference between pure software implementations and secure implementations that run on the secure environment, on the secure hardware. So typically, DRM will have pure software implementations run on a general purpose processor or CPU, and then you have specific hardened implementations then run on secure domains like the T trust zone on Android. And those tend to be much more secure, and that's what we're seeing. So those would be the case of Widevine Level 1, PlayReady SL3000, and Fairplay Secure Enclave. So those tend to be way more secure because they run in a much more restricted part of the device. And so we see that the primary attack vector of hackers tends to be the software DRM, and the software DRM tend to have a limited lifespan, which then brings the challenge to the renewability of security. And renewability of security is a really big challenge, especially when you think about devices that will have a lifespan beyond 3-4 years. Because after 3-4 years, a lot of OEMs do not have incentives to keep on providing updates. And that means that those devices will live for 10 years. And so then the pay TV and the streaming platforms are confronted with the reality of what we do with these devices. Do I block these devices and I'll impact my genuine paying users and affect my revenue? Or do I accommodate and try to mitigate and put some constraints on how this device can consume content? And that's really where the biggest challenge is today, is to balance that act of security and mitigating piracy versus not impacting the business in a substantial way.
Actually, you raised an important point there, because of course we have this move away from operator-based set-top boxes to a much more an app solution running on a consumer device like a television or some sort of streaming stick. But specifically with regard to the television, this is a device that most people still buy to last 7 to 10 years or even longer, in actual fact. And I guess we haven't to date really had a sort of breach that would cause the loss of content to a big enough vendor of such a display. Do you see that as a big issue, or is that what sort of issues do you see around that? And probably Rodrigo, if you can answer initially, and then we can go to Tom to give your hardware perspective on that, maybe.
Yeah. So yes. So televisions tend to be a more closed ecosystem. So the attack surface on TVs tends to be a little bit narrower, but like you say, they live for longer times, and so technology and the type of attacks and the type of tools will evolve, and there's going to be a point where those devices will become vulnerable, and we see them becoming vulnerable. I think that then the bigger issue with those devices is because they tend to have, at least at the time when they were built, higher levels of security. They can get access to higher levels of content resolution, typically 4K Ultra HD, which tends to be then an area where content owners and specifically Hollywood studios tend to be very, very strict about their content not being served to devices that are vulnerable, no matter if they're older. So yeah, that's a very important part.
And I guess, of course, we all know that the old deals with the old old devices produced for an operator, there were always clauses about what would happen if countermeasures would no longer be sufficient. I'm not sure we've ever really had that, not since the early days of satellite TV, where that sort of hardware swap was handled by smart card swaps, basically. What are your thoughts about this, Tom? Specifically about that issue of the long life device out of control of the content provider?
It is very difficult. I mean, as you say, in the old days, smart cards themselves had many countermeasures built in, and the doing a smart card swap, that's not without its. I mean, it's easier than swapping a set-top box, but it's not without its logistical challenges and the expense, of course. But now we're in a situation where, I mean, how long have smart TVs been around as an example? Probably since about 2010, but probably in quite a basic form back then.
I think you're looking at 2008 actually, but yeah, large scale usage.
A long time ago in consumer electronics. Yeah. I mean, you're looking at hundreds of devices, if not more. I think ultimately, as a content provider, you've got to take a sort of cold business look at it, and it's like, well, we've got this long tail that sort of, ever since the advent of these devices, it's just longer and longer and longer. And at some point, your not just security actually, but your overall support requirements just become swamped, and you have to sort of take a decision to cut it off. Now, what I would say, which is something I've been thinking about, if you think of, there probably aren't that many 2010 smart TVs where the smart TV part of it is actually being used in anger anymore, because that really was the sort of first gen of these sort of things. But if we say, look, from maybe 2015, 2017 onwards, the capabilities in TVs of that era and since then are a lot better, and I suspect that we might actually reach this point where the last few years worth of crop of TVs are not so vulnerable. And that's just as well, because, we expect those TVs to be around for a while. So I think we might, I'm not saying it's going to go away, but I think the issue might sort of self-regulate itself a little bit. But for sure, I mean, the glory days of, a tier one pay TV satellite operator working hand in glove with their security provider, where there was all sorts of contractual liability clauses, and it was basically done, please take care of our security, it's down to you. Those days they're not gone, because they still exist in legacy satellite distribution, but they are they're not the main thing anymore. Today it's all about streaming, DRM, horizontal devices, i.e. in a lot of cases, or in most cases, just retail devices, and the whole trust model has completely changed now. Yeah.
I suppose also that, like you say, the modern television displays now, and certainly modern devices when they're sold, because of regulations, are being introduced to help the consumer and the lifetime and secure. And
more aware. Is it 5 years? The EU? I can't remember.
I think it's I think 7 years is now a typical support sort of duration for a device these days. But that's still that's still quite a bit shorter than our than what many people still hold their TVs for. I think even within our rarefied space of actual people involved in the industry, I still find people today who've got 10-year-old or 11-year-old, even 12-year-old displays still in use. Although they're using on those USB sticks, those sticks, basically streaming sticks, that probably are the fallback scenario in the event of a of a failure of a particular device, maybe an older device. Is that what you're thinking would be a good route for an operator well, a content operator would be to offer that sort of ability to go, well, why don't you use this USB, this particular HDMI device?
Very much so. I think the cost is obviously, I mean, yeah, people, this whole set-top box is dead thing. I mean, that is a set-top box. It's just a small one.
Yeah.
And, it might be a retail device, or it might be essentially, if you look under the hood, it's probably a retail device. If it was a big operator who's got the wherewithal, it's a retail device that's essentially been forked and customized just for that operator service, which, it's a very pragmatic, it's a fairly low cost solution for the consumer. It's easy. Plug it in and go.
Yeah. So,
and if
Rodrigo,
I might add, Ian, and it removes another complication, especially from the smart TV ecosystem, because the smart TV is so fragmented in terms of OS that using these sticks allows operators just to build one app that runs on the stick, and so it's harmonized across the users instead of having to building different apps for different TV manufacturers, and sometimes even for different firmware versions, which makes it incredibly complex in terms of device rich. So yeah.
That actually does lead into the other issue, of course, that's come about in the move of the industry away from proprietary set-top boxes to using consumer electronics devices of various sorts, and that is the massive diversity of the hardware and the software platforms that those people who are content operators, the Netflix of this world, have got there's a lot to support, and as well in the fact that, let's face it, those 3 DRMs are effectively applied based on hardware decisions and choices rather than something you can pick and choose. So in that context, what do you, that balance of consumer electronics devices, possible breach situation, how do you advise someone in that realm from an Irdeto perspective to how they defend themselves from a substantial breach, for example?
Yeah. So look, I think in terms of so DRM is probably the primary attack vector that we see today when pirates try to steal content, and it's widely attacked. I think there's 2 things: control renewability where possible, specifically around software DRMs. Sometimes that means having to work with some proprietary implementations, and then look at the data, look at the data around DRM usage, and have a plan to gradually improve the security of your service. And DRM is obviously an important aspect, but there's many other aspects. Look into the top 3 security recommendations that I would make is to use different encryption keys for different resolution groups. So Ultra HD encrypted with one key, Full HD with another one, SD with another one, so that you can control the distribution of content of Ultra HD and 4K content only to the most secure devices. Use CDN tokenization. Do not open your CDN, because from the moment that pirates get your key, they will use your CDN as a means to distribute the content to their users. So not only you're not converting pirate application or site users into paying subscribers, you're also bearing the cost of distributing that content to the users. And the second one is to enforce policies that enable you to block certain categories of devices. For example, we see a lot of attacks through scripts, and you'll see bursts of API calls. We'll see emulators being used in services. Why would anyone use an Android application running on emulator on the PC to watch content in a legitimate way. So those would be the top three. I mean, there's many more, but I think it's really important for streaming platforms to have a security strategy that is part of their product roadmap. We know that revenue growth and customer experience is the most important, but don't just disregard security.
What I hear you saying is you got to lock things down, focus on the experience for the customers who are your real customers, and therefore locking it down. So being very controlled about what devices do actually access your content and how they access the content is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah. And of course, being able to revoke access to particular device types is also obviously probably part of that.
Exactly.
Yeah. So that actually does raise an interesting point about the diversity of having three DRMs effectively in the world today, three forms of content protection running out there, rather than say a multitude of different flavors and variations from a multitude of different content providers. So is there a challenge with the diversity of just having those three, especially when in actual fact those three are really just one for each type of technology platform? In other words, if you're Android, it's Widevine. If you're Apple, it's Fair Play. If you're PC, you might have those as well, or you might have some Play Ready in there. You're not necessarily going to be using Play Ready across the board in different areas. Is that diversity enough, or has that made the attack surface big enough for the pirate to actually create weaknesses in itself?
I mean, I'm not sure it certainly adds complexity. If someone wants to launch a service, it adds complexity. Pirates will look at the weakest link. What we've seen is that the weakest link is not so much the type of DRM, but it's more the software versus hardware, and that's where we see the difference. And the software lifespan tends to be much shorter, and therefore the recommendation of using the different encryption keys for different resolution groups is the number one most critical one, because for those devices you want to serve 720p maximum. Actually, you can certain streaming platforms go one step further, and if it's a non-compromised device that has too many users using that type of device and you want to block it, then downgrade it to 320 or 480. So they can still watch the content, but in a way you kind of you're nudging them to move to the next device. And so yeah, I guess the software and the hardware is the biggest difference in terms of vulnerabilities and attacks.
Okay, I just want to mention we are starting to get some questions that are coming up. If you can ask the questions via the Q&A option, it will make it a lot clearer for us to deal with those questions. But I know I'll pick up some of those questions in a moment that have come through. So that's really interesting about the answering that thing about the three. I suppose the key question is where is the development taking place now with regard to content protection and DRM? Are those three implementations seem very comfortable in the market? Is there room for a fourth player? I know there are smaller DRMs out there, but is there a fourth player that could actually come in and do something dynamic and important, especially with regards to giving a higher level of protection? What do you think there, Rodrigo?
There is, but I think that role is very much limited to managed boxes. So set-top boxes managed by the pay TV, because in order to be able to access the TE, the secure environment on the devices, and I guess Tom can speak more intelligently about this. You need to not anyone have access to those secure domains. Those are gated. Those are gated domains, and so you cannot just go and update and load your DRM into those secure domains. So, which means that you are limited to software-only implementations. The other challenge is that all the consumer devices come with a DRM, and most of the DRMs are license-free. And it's really difficult for someone to build a business model that is competing against free.
I suppose that may be, what about you, Tom, in terms of that having just 3 DRM options, really, is that something which you see any technical risks from?
I mean, I think from an engineering point of view, you'd want a couple more, but from a support point of view, 3 is plenty.
Yeah.
If you're delivering content. And you know, the highest level of each of those has so far proven robust. Let's hope that continues. It's difficult to see a sort of a new player come into the field because those 3 are so embedded now and have been for.
Well, I suppose the interesting question is, I know at least one of those players, I won't mention which, is probably going to be quite average, doesn't really put a lot of effort into developing that particular DRM anymore.
That's true. I mean, as a general comment on the DRM industry, I'd say it sort of reached maturity a few years ago, and we probably had its sort of glory time during the 2000s when, yeah, and as to be expected, it was when streaming was growing, and you'd expect that to be the case. I mean, Widevine has been around since 2001 or something. I can't remember, you know, in some form or another.
Yeah.
So it's you're right. The industry. I hope they don't rest on their laurels. But it's sort of like it's a done deal. It seems to be, as far as you know, the highest end version of each of those. You know, they're deeply embedded in the SoC. You know, either as a TE or some other form of secure enclave or something like this. I mean, if that got broken open, then there'd be all sorts of issues. But it would that would be so far so good. I think there's other as a pirate, there are other avenues which would be better explored if you want to.
I suppose one of the key impediments of a 4th player is the fact that there's no money in it, as Rodrigo mentioned. You know, these are all free effectively.
Yeah, I think a 4th player would only do it if there was some, you know, if it was a lost leader in itself, and there was some other sort of angle they were looking for.
Unless they offered something which gave a higher level of security in the face of some sort of weakness of the existing systems, really. And I think, but there's lots of, I hear we've talked about countermeasures. Countermeasures have always been in place, you know, going back to the hot smart card days. It's about making that attempt to break the solution harder by applying various techniques. Key ones which have just been mentioned there about you know, having set keys for particular resolutions. I think with the one we didn't mention, which actually has come up in one of the questions, key rotation. In fact, Kaking Lim has said, how effective with key rotation and tokenization how effective is that to remove or reduce piracy? I'm reading between the lines here a little bit on the question. And which of those are more effective, or is it both of them have to be? So what do you think, Rodrigo and Tom?
So I mean, key rotation is very effective. However, key rotation has a challenge because it will generate very spiky traffic. And for example, some football leagues in Europe, they are starting to ask for key rotation during these high-profile sports events. I've heard 15 minutes, I've heard 5 minutes. The challenge has to do with the way how the clients, the video players behave. So the content, just a little insight on the content is the content streaming is distributed in video chunks. For live, these video chunks need to be very small, typically 2-3 seconds, and the way that the logic in clients is that typically they will request the encryption key one video segment ahead of playback. So if you have a high profile event with 5 million concurrent viewers. Those 5 million concurrent viewers will hit your DRM server within a 3-second window. And then they'll subside. So basically you have a massive spike, and then you'll have no traffic. And apart from new users that just tune in. So that puts a lot of cost pressure on the infrastructure that you need to build, for let's say a football match, 90 minutes, and then you'll have 6 key rotations. So you'll have less than 1 minute. You need to scale up your system for less than 1 minute, very, very high traffic, and for the rest, nothing. And so that's a real challenge, and puts the DRM, makes the DRM into a much more business critical component. Now, that's one of the areas where the industry and the industry groups like that -IF and SVTO we're working on, but we're still not there. And there's things we can do. And at Irdeto we've done the FIFA World Cup and the Super Bowl, but it's challenging. The other aspect of tokenization, I mean, typically access to any endpoint should have an access control. Tokenization is one built. What Pirates will do is that they will automate this acquiring tokens and then interacting with the endpoints for both DRM and CDN. And so you should have the monitoring in place, so that you'll be able to find out what would be the most effective solution for the way how you run your business.
Okay. That actually does raise an interesting point. I don't know whether, Tom, you got an answer on that one before I go to a point that's come from what Rodrigo said?
So
the key rotation and
key
things like
rotation
that.
versus
Well, just basically about the mechanisms and how good they are. And are we out of those ways of
I mean,
back against the pirate?
To play devil's advocate, well, not quite devil's advocate for a minute, but I mean, if I was to look at if it was the case of a legacy provider, the days of providing a managed set-top box and all the security that goes with it, yeah, the cost of that was an awful lot, and it's only fair that they should take security in the new world just as seriously. It's just you've got to spend it in different places. So having a lot of money poured into a security operations center for monitoring these things, and dealing. Yeah, I mean that is as Rodrigo said, that issue of license reacquisition when you've got a frequent change of key. Yeah, that it's notwithstanding what's going on in SVT. I mean that is a big deal. I mean, but it's within sort of known. Let's put it. Known methods of scaling up and scaling down. Yeah, this is sort of classic internet technology. And I mean, the one good thing is that the skill set out there in the industry is when we're dealing with internet delivered content, it's well, one, the skill set is available, it's less niche, the work required, but two, the people who are trying to attack you, there's a lot more of those. This isn't some niche sort of someone in their sort of home lab, sort of taking apart a smart card. This can be anyone who's got some nous when it comes to web delivered content can sort of have a little go at it. So it's difficult.
I suppose the key question that came from the discussion as well is it started to point out the fact that content protection isn't just about the device; it's about how the content gets to the device, all the way from the original content sources at every step, all the way through. And I know that that's something which we've discussed in the past, that this is an important countermeasures in themselves about making sure there's protection all the way along the path. So because of course, locking down the end device is one thing, but if you lock it down there, then it's whack-a-mole where they're going to get the content from otherwise. So yeah, so maybe you could talk through some of those issues and challenges you see on the end-to-end.
Yeah, shall I go?
Yeah.
Well, in my previous auditing role, I mean, we didn't just look at consumer devices, but there was stuff in post-production, so daily rushes from movies. Those are generally sort of very heavily watermarked to individual recipients. But then through the whole post-production chain and color grading and all this stuff, and eventually you get to a master. It's and that, a lot of human factors come into play there. It's like, oh, I just lent this to my friend, or screeners for Oscars, judges and things like this. Then we've got the actual delivery piece and device side that we've talked about. But then at the very end, until Elon Musk works out a way of putting receptors actually in my eyeballs, you've got to have a screen. There's a screen. You watch it on the screen. Let's say it gets to the screen by the preferred method, which is HDCP protected HDMI. These days, it's within the budget of anyone basically to get a very high-end recording device and set it up on a tripod and all the rest of it. I think only watermarking will save you in that case.
Yeah. Well, actually, that's just raised me. I always remember in my professional role finding access to content and finding an interesting piece of content where it was a wonderful reproduction of what was on of a particular program from I think it was Disney as well at the time, until of course I noticed that a person stood up in the middle of the film and walked across the middle of it, which is clearly pointing out the analog, what we used to call the analog hole, that it has to at some point be converted to light. It has to be exposed to something which is easily capturable. And like you say, I don't know how to close down that other thing. But actually, one of the questions that's come up in the questions was about, can any of the presenters give an example of costly security breaches in the last few years? Well, I do remember the costly security breach of some HDCP keys going walkabout and being available to some people, so that it became much easier to capture the content in pristine form straight out the back of some devices because of that availability of those keys. So what in both your experiences, remembering of course that almost every one of these is confidential, maybe you could give us a sort of a flavor of the big basic hacks that have occurred with content, the sort of challenges that have had to be coped with. Maybe Tom, you can start with that.
Well, in the old days, there were a couple of the sort of endemic issues in the US and the UK to some extent with smart card hacks. But you're right. The HDCP one, I think the first version, as I remember, was almost dead on arrival. I get mixed up with the versioning between HDCP and HDMI, and then the next one lasted a couple of years. Was it someone published a master key on the internet or something?
Yeah.
And as far as I know, the latest,
I think it was a version 1.4 hack. Probably.
Yeah, that rings a bell.
Remember rightly. It's a bit long ago now, but probably since then it's occurred as well.
And it was always difficult because there's a legitimate market, professional market for things like HDCP, HDMI splitters and repeaters, and of course they all need keys within to be able to talk to the source, and it just opened up the problem's not as bad as it was. Where are we with 2.2? Depending on who you believe, it's broken, but not like it. Yeah.
I think the phrase is bypassable.
So it's such a shame because the whole HDMI HDCP thing, it's it's all we've got. That is the connection to a screen for certainly in the in the domestic world.
Yeah. What about you, Rodrigo? What have you got a horror story for us?
Yeah, I have a couple. So evolving from the HDCP, the content coming out of the HDMI tends to be uncompressed content, which means someone who steals the content needs to re-encode the content and compress it. The latest attacks that attack the DRM are able to steal the key that gives you access to the compressed, decrypted content, which is basically means it's ready for consumption. It's encoded, so pirates don't need to spend money. So typically, the mechanics of attack is, I'm gonna play the pirate role. I'm gonna use the browser because that's the most open platform. That's the one I'm gonna use first. I'm gonna reverse engineer the app, understand the workflow, understand the tokens that I need to get use those to get a DRM license from a vulnerable device so I can steal the key. Now I have the key. I'm going to use the key and I'm going to hit the CDN and download the content. Most of the CDNs are open, which means now not only what I mentioned a while ago, not only the service is not converting these users into paying users, but they also, covering for the cost. And we have heard customers that doing high-profile events, sports events, where the CDN costs increase by 25% during those events. I mean, for those of you who are not aware, the CDN cost tends to be the biggest expenditure of any streaming platform. And we're talking about double, sometimes triple-digit $1 million a year. So 25% for any given day, it's very significant. And that's probably the number one attack that is it's still happening today.
Yeah. Actually, that does lead to a question raised by one of our contributors, and actually Graham, who's also a member of one of the exec. He's actually raised the point as well, is that, and he's been very, very sneaky here in the fact that is one of the issues that there's a risk that a competitor might mount a piracy approach attack that costs their competitors more money. And that's obviously leads into the question, just how far do you need to go, to what do you have to spend to make your platform secure enough, I guess. Is that something which people see as risks and plan for now? That what happens if a competitor causes that sort of growth in CDN cost?
I mean, I hope not. I mean, this is a different level of piracy, right? Well, I wouldn't even call it piracy. I would call this more corporate attack.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm so far I haven't seen anything like that. That would be very damaging. I think the industry needs to come together to address the issues and not really to work like that. So
yeah, I think that question is raised because there has been some very public scenarios in which some companies have caused problems back in the past. I haven't heard of much in the recent times about
I don't know what you're referring to, but
yeah, we don't. Although there's some good documentaries out there if you want to chase them up on various platforms, but they're quite fun to watch. So just going to another question, because I suppose the other thing, and it comes down to the level of countermeasures you apply everywhere. What do you think of geo-blocking in the way of providing a level of security to the content delivery to a device? Is that something which is still an important aspect?
Yeah. So geo-blocking is really important. Part of my job, obviously working with clients, but also it's also about educating on the best practice. Geo-blocking is always a must-have. It's a must-have as part of the licensing requirements, typically, well, always. But it needs to be used together with VPN and proxy detection and hosting detection. So it's not only about blocking access from the outside of the authorized geography, but it's also addressing, preventing VPN proxy hosting. So typically we see pirates setting up their attack servers on the cloud. So no reason for a legitimate consumer to be accessing the content through a cloud server. And then it's another widespread attack, which is residential IP addresses. You have some free VPN services, which are, they will give you free VPN access. You'll install the client on your PC, and then they use your client as an exit point from the VPN, which then shows up as a residential IP address, which then makes it much harder to detect and shut down. There are methods, but definitely geo-blocking and VPN detection, proxy detection, all that is critical. It's part of, I would say, the baseline requirements.
That's actually an important point, actually, is protecting all the avenues about there's no purpose to someone accessing your content into the CDN from another CDN host, for example, unless it's part of your infrastructure. So you definitely should be acting on as a whitelist, it's almost blacklist approach to the infrastructure of this world rather than residential addresses. Because of course the other aspect about geolocation, it only works if you are actually not selling your product worldwide. I don't think Netflix needs to worry too much about doesn't think about too much about its geo blocking from the perspective of which IP ranges and which countries can access its content, because it wants everyone to access its content and its services. In fact, it's almost one of the features that you can use your Netflix account when you're in the US and when you're in the Netherlands.
You get a different catalog
content.
presented, though.
Yeah,
it's we did some work at Farncombe years ago on this, and it was back in the days when Netflix, it's matured now, but they had a significantly different catalog: US, Canada, UK, Australia. I mean, I will defend the industry actually on the geo-blocking thing, because since we started looking at this, I think it was 12 years ago, 11, 12 years ago, within the years that sort of followed, certainly the big streamers really massively improved. I won't name any names, but there was some very easily circumvented services out there, and the industry really pulled its socks off up over the next 5 years. But it is still whack-a-mole. But there are decent vendors out there. There's a handful of vendors in the geo space who are very specialist, and they don't just serve the content business. They've got to be really hot on this for things like gambling and sort of regional blocks for those sorts of things. So, but yeah, as Rodrigo said, it has to be there. It's a non-negotiable, and you've got to do a good job and update daily the database of all these things.
I suppose that's the other whack-a-mole you have to do if you want to start blocking down these sort of accesses to your network. You've got to be able to identify the valid accesses, because the last thing you want to do is to block a valid customer who's trying to use it in the correct way. I think we all experience I'm using my mobile phone for access, but actually it's been detected as coming from another country, therefore I can't watch iPlayer situation. I suppose the other key thing to now moving as we're coming towards the end of the webinar is, I suppose it's key, where do we see content security going next, particularly in the face of things that come from one of our previous webinars about quantum safe cryptography, basically, to defend against what happens when we do have quantum computing based mechanisms involved that apparently will be super fantastic and be able to easily break all the encryption that we actually have that gives us content protection. So that's just one aspect. So where do we think the future is going with that? Maybe we'll start with you, Rodrigo.
Yeah, I mean, quantum computing is something that we've been looking at, not only from the media. Actually, we've been looking at quantum computing, especially around computer systems used in satellite systems, because once they're up there, they're really hard to do maintenance. And so, they live 10, 15, sometimes 20 years. So that's one of the areas we're looking at. For media, I mean, mainly we're looking at the NIST approved algorithms to replace the asymmetric algorithms, because those are the ones that are mostly affected by quantum computing. But again, this is an industry effort. So right now we're not doing anything specific, but we're keeping an eye on that. In terms of what's next for us, we collect a lot of metadata from the DRM, and so metadata that is in part of the DRM license requests, and this data cannot be modified, is often obfuscated, and we use that data to determine some attack patterns. Our vision is to use machine learning at scale and in real time to score the threat level of certain interactions with devices. I mean, we're in very early phases. We have kind of an offline model, but that's where we think that we're going next, and I think the industry in general.
Okay. What about you, Tom?
Yeah, I mean, well, from a semiconductor point of view, there are certainly things going on with regard to say quantum safe crypto. I mean, well, a slightly glib comment, but I will say that if the quantum revolution does come in one big, if it really comes overnight, then I think being able to rip off TV is probably the least of our worries. If you're thinking about
We
banking
were
and
worrying about our bank access, yeah.
yeah, so I'm hoping it's a way away yet, but
Yeah.
for sure these things are being looked at, and maybe that is the incremental sort of uplift, if you like, to these sort of rather static DRMs that have been there for a while now.
So you see some more dynamism possibly being there. Maybe that's
it
going to
might.
what's being called for a new entrant or new investment. Is those
Possibly.
challenges to the existing DRMs from the pirates themselves?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
And it'd be nice if, because it'd be nice if it was done proactively as well, because unfortunately a lot of security is sort of looked at as a bit of we have to do it, it's more costs, and we don't realize until the service is rolled out for 2 years, they're getting pirated left, right, and center, and it's too much of a pain to put security in, and they wish they'd done it at the start. And so it'd be nice something to maybe give the industry a little bit of I'm not saying I want the quantum revolution to happen tomorrow, but yeah.
No, I suppose to me actually, it's like I almost see it as the return of glue and the proverbial glue, of trying to block ways of people working straight through the protocols directly, straight through the cryptography directly, and maybe there is a proverbial glue that we can add to these devices to basically lock them off so that they can't actually be attacked. But who knows? And maybe that's something which is going to have to develop further. And I suppose the other thing we've got to look at here is these are just the sort of top surface of devices in the home. We talked primarily about media today, and I know we've got one question here from Andy. A lot of the issues that we're talking about here about content protection from a device perspective, these are the sorts of things that have to be done to the rest of our electronic attack surface that we have in our homes. If someone wants to hack my my home control, for example, that's obviously a burgeoning area of development, which is just as serious, like you just mentioned. If quantum cryptography comes into play, then the fact that someone can rip off videos is the least of our problems. Yeah. Okay, thank you very much for that. We're now at the end of the hour, and we've gone for a wide variety of different subjects. What I'd just like to do, if I can just go back to sharing the presentation. Okay. So thank you for your time today. I hope it was informative. I just wanted to tell you a little bit more about the IET Technical Networks. Obviously, for those of you who found us, you already know a little bit about the IET. We are great for building continuing professional development, great for new events, more events coming, which I'll come to in a moment. And you can actually follow us up more at the NGEX service based on NGEX.iet.org/technical network. So you can follow us there. I will mention at the moment, we're undergoing one of those IT uplifts that is causing us to go in read-only mode, which has been a planned event, but it's quite awkward to have happened at this point. But there you go. Please do go and have a look there. There's a great discussions taking place there. But you will also find us in other places beyond NGEX. You will find us on our YouTube channel, which is shown, the URL is shown on screen. You can also follow us on LinkedIn via the URL we've got there. We'll show up there as the IET Media Network. That's the best place as well to find out about future events, both in person and virtual like this one. So please do go along to that. And obviously for all of the presenters here today, if you quickly record our names, you should be able to actually find us on LinkedIn, and I'm sure you can ask questions and follow-up questions there for us. Additionally then, what we've got coming up in the near future, we've got some more events coming up, but one that's 100% definite is this one here, and it's about reproduction of hearing the past. So this is about how to actually provide the sounds of yesterday. And you can find out more by scanning that lovely QR code on the page or going to search on the events page of the IET.org website. And that one's actually on the 3rd of July between 4 and 5, like this one. And I think that's us come to an end. I'd like to thank you all for your time. Thanks very much, Rodrigo. Thanks very much, Tom. Look forward to talking to you all again soon. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Bye.